Welcome to the video for our 8th Winter Zoom Embroidery Series class and the final class for our floral stitch sampler. So over here is my completed stitch sampler with everything we've learned. There's a couple things in here that we did in earlier classes, but I'm going to put together a template where I'll take a picture of this and show you what all the different stitches are. So that will be coming. Tonight, for our final stitches, we're going to be doing 3 stitches. The first one is the chain stitch, which I used for this stem over here. It makes these open loops in a line. It can also be worked in a curve. It's up to you. And then I filled it with a back stitch. So I just came in afterwards and did that. And then we're going to move on to these really fun needle weaving stitches that are done in 3D above the surface of the fabric. And those can be tacked down or left loose. There's this one here, the woven Picot. And then this one here is the woven bar. So if you look closely, the bar has 1, 2 sections, and this Picot has 1, 2, 3 sections. And they're worked similarly, but not exactly. So we're going to do all of that. But let's go ahead and jump into the chain stitch. This does not use a lot of thread. And since we're just doing it on a very short line here to add it to one of your existing flowers, you really don't need much thread at all. If you don't have a flower, if you haven't come to class and you don't have a flower ready to go, feel free to just make a stem. You can add a flower to it later since we're not doing a flower, but you know so many now. So we're going to do this short little stem. And I'm going to switch over to this. I'm going to make this screen big for you. I remembered this time. And like I said, it can be worked on a straight line or a curve. Don't worry about this. That's our woven Picot that we're going to get to later, or excuse me, our woven bar. So I'll start down here for the chain stitch and draw a little line. And I am going to be working with a very short piece of Pearl Cotton 3, which is the fat kind from your kit. And I'm just going to work 4 or 5 chains along here, and you're going to get the hang of this really quickly because this is a lot like the Lazy Daisy, which we did in our first floral class. So I'm going to come up at the bottom of my line. Okay. And then I'm going to go back down, and again, this depends on the type of fabric you have, the width of your thread, the width of your needle. You can go down in the same hole or right next to where you came up before. And then we're going to skip straight to the pro move here. I'm going to come up 1 stitch length, and that stitch length is always your choice, right? I'm going to tuck the tail of my thread underneath my needle so that when I pull, I get my loop, just like the Lazy Daisy. If this was a Lazy Daisy, I would go into the fabric right here and tack this down, but it's not the Lazy Daisy. So I'm going to pull this off to the side, and I'm going to repeat. I'm going to go in the same hole I just came up or right next to it. And I'm going to come up 1 stitch length, tuck this tail under my needle, and pull. Again, not the Lazy Daisy, so we're just going to keep going. I'm going to go in the same hole or right next to it, come up 1 stitch length, make sure the tail is underneath my needle, and pull. Okay. And then when you want to finish, I don't think I need to go any further. I feel like you've got this because you guys are experts now. When I do want to finish, then I just act like it's a Lazy Daisy. I'm just going to go and tack this down. And that's it. That's finished. Now, if I want to go in and fill this, I just go in and I do a back stitch that starts and ends inside these spaces here. That can also jump over these inside. You can play with this. You can add a lot of different embellishments to this. You can weave it. You can whip it where you go in looping around. Lots of fun ways to play with it because it's just a line stitch. Now I'm going to show you one more variation on this, which is an open chain stitch. So let's say I'm starting a new one. I've got my line here. For an open chain stitch, you want to start on one side of your line. You're going to come down, instead of in the same place, you're going to come down on the other side of your line. Okay. Now I'm going to come up one stitch length on side A. So for me, that was, I started on the left, so I'm going to come up on the left, one stitch length ahead, and I'm going to go back down on the right, one stitch length ahead. And I'm leaving a loop here. I'm not going to pull it tight yet. I'm going to come up again, one stitch length on the left. You could, of course, draw 3 lines if that would be easier for you to envision where your needle's going to come up and go back down. Oops. I didn't really leave myself enough thread here. So this one's all about tension. Sorry, I'm making this all weird because I didn't leave myself enough thread. There we go. So by pulling on your thread, you get tension for your next loop. And then you would come up and go back down and then do a little tack to end this. So that is an open chain stitch. And that's that. Okay, so the next stitch that we're going to do is that woven picot. We're going to start with the one with the 3 sections here. And for this stitch, you are going to want a spare needle or a straight pin. And I am going to put, let's say I'm putting a leaf with this on a stem that I already have. So over here, I used it for a petal, but I told you in my email that we're gonna use it for a leaf because we're just gonna do one. So you can, if you already have an existing stem, this is a flower stem that you've already stitched. What you can do is decide how far you want it to come out. Let's say you want it to come out to here. You're gonna put your pin, so a leaf that looks like this. Okay. You're gonna put your pin in at the end of your leaf and have it come back up. It doesn't really matter. You can, if you have a sewn stem here, it can come up on the other side of it. That's fine. But you want your little head of your pin to be up here. That can also just be a needle in there. Okay. What we're going to do, this one, you want a lot of thread for this one. And the reason for that is because it doesn't look good if you can't really switch your threads. If you run out of thread halfway through this one, you're kind of in trouble. So start with more than you need, especially while you're still learning this stitch. I've got on this one, I've got length fingers to shoulder plus probably 8 to 10 inches. And what I've done is I've just got a long tail here so that it doesn't get in my way too much. So I'm just going to keep an eye on that to make sure I'm not sewing with a double thread. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come up. This was a misleading drawing because you can't really taper at the end here. So it's going to have a wide base. I'll show this to you here, that it starts wide and gets narrow. So I'm going to come up one side. I'm going to pull back behind the head of my pin and go in at the base on the other side. Okay. Checking the back to make sure my knot is taut against the back of the fabric. It is. Then I'm going to come up in the middle on that first line that I drew, or just eyeball in the middle. Now I'm going to come up here and go behind the head of my pin again. I've got 3 threads. we're doing some weaving here. So these are our warp threads that we're going to use to weave our other thread through. This will be the weft of our weaving. So 1, 2, 3. Now I've come behind here and I'm going to start by going underneath my first thread here that's closest to me. I'm going under that one. And I'm going to go over the middle one and back under the outside edge. Uh-oh. Oh, okay, thought I had a knot. Okay. Oh, I already split my threads. Look at this. This is why it's a good idea to go through backwards, because I have my point caught my thread. So I'm going to undo this little business. I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to unthread my needle. I'm going to pull this. I'm going to use my needle to pull this out. Okay, because I split my warp thread. All right. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while I rethread my needle. Okay, I'm back in business. So I came around here. I went under my first thread. I'm going to go over the middle one. I am now doing the smart thing and leading with the eye of my needle. I could also switch to a tapestry needle, which doesn't have a point. They're a rounded edge. And with this much weaving, if you have a tapestry needle, I would recommend doing that. But under the first one, over the middle one, under the third one. Okay, and now I'm going to tug this so that I'm getting a nice tight weave up near the top where the head of my pin is. Now, I just went under this one, so I'm going to go over, back over the one I just went under the middle, over the edge. Okay, so I'm just over, under, over, under, over, under, all three. Okay, so I'm going to go under here, over, under. Tension is a very important part of this needle weaving, so I'm just making sure if I don't pull too tight, otherwise I'll make my leaf really, really skinny, and I don't want to do that. Okay, now I'm going to go over, under, over. Okay. And just kind of pushing those to the top, under, over, under. Over, under, over. You can see this starting to take shape now. If I got a little tight on that one, it got a little skinny. Under, over, under. Okay, and I'm just going to keep doing that. So let's skip to the end. Okay, so I'm at my last row. I'm going to go over, under. And I've got my end thread here. So the way that you finish this is that you're going to do your last weaving stitch. I'm going to go over this one. Instead of coming out, I'm actually just going to hide this. I'm going to put my needle into the fabric right in the middle, right by my pin. And I'm just going to knot that off like we always do. And then what I can do is I can come over here on this side once I've knotted off, pull my pin out, sort of even these out. And then I have this nice petal shape. So if you want to, you can leave this freestanding the way I did, where these kind of just hang out. Or if you want to, you can come back underneath and just run your needle through the end here and tack this down. You can tack it down flat, or you can tack it down so it has a little dimensionality to it. So it's, it's got a little arc to it. That's up to you. But that is the woven picot. Now we're going to jump to the woven bar, which is very similar. For the woven bar, we've got the 2 sections instead of 3. And you can do this the exact same way as you did the woven picot. But let's say you're over here and you're like, oh shoot, I don't have enough room to put this in here, because this is all going to get in the way and this is going to get very, very messy. So you can do it with your pen. If you're going to do it with your pen, this is only 2 sections, so this one's more narrow. And come up here, go back down with your pen. I'm sorry, go back behind your pen and come in like this. And we're just going to weave back and forth between the 2. But like I said, if you don't have enough room, or if you want a really long one that you can get crazy with, you don't even need this pin. Pull that out. You don't even need it to start with. And instead of using a pin, you use your finger. And you're going to choose the length that you want your leaf to be. And you're just going to keep your finger in place and use the tension from that to make your leaf. Now, our woven picot, we started at the pin head. We started at the top or the end of the leaf and work towards the base. For the woven bar, you actually start on top of the fabric and work your way up into the air, or if you're working with a pin, towards the pin head. So it's backwards. Okay. So this also takes a lot of thread, especially if you're going to do a long one, because you're starting out with so much thread. But you can make this as long as you want. You can twist it up and do it into crazy shapes. I'm going to do a short one for the sake of time. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and I am going to come up in the middle. Okay, and I'm going to start my weaving. Oh my gosh, I did it again. You're kidding me. All right, I can fix this one without unthreading my needle. So close. Maybe. I made a mess. Well, I had to unthread my needle to get that fixed. So let this be a lesson to all of you. Weave with your eye first. Oh my goodness. Okay, so here we go. I came back up. In the center, I'm keeping, instead of using a needle, I've got this loop around my finger. And now I'm just going to go over, under, all around. Okay, again, tension is important with this one, especially when you're first getting started. So you want to try to keep the tension even so that your woven bar stays a consistent width. So you can make it skinny by pulling this really tight, or you can keep it a little bit wider by not pulling as tight on your rows of weaving. It's a little tricky keeping them consistent when you first get started, but once you get a few rows in, it's easier. So just be diligent at the beginning. Pushing that down. So I'm just making sure that I alternate wrapping directions over, under, over, under, over, under. This would go really, really fast, and you wouldn't have to deal with accidentally splitting your threads if you were using pearl cotton, especially pearl cotton 3, the fat stuff. I'm using a variegated thread, the ombre thread, so I don't know if you can tell in the video, but I'm getting some nice color variation. I don't think you can really tell, but you kind of get a striped bar here. Okay, so now you can see this starting to take shape. You can see how much less I'm having to do to keep my tension even now that I've gotten several rows done. It was just at the beginning that I really had to pay attention. Now we're zipping along. All right, and we will skip to the end. Okay, so I've made quite a bit of progress here. I've been pushing this down quite tight. You can kind of see how I'm getting that striped effect because of the variegated thread. Now I can play with how this looks by loosening up that tension and get a lot more out of my thread if I loosen it up a bit. If you're doing a really long one of these, when you're done, you can do what I did with this blue one here, and you can twist it and tack it down that way, or you can always just tack it down straight, or like we did the other one, you can have a little arc there, you can bend it. So those are your options when you tack this down. I want to show you what you can do if you misjudge how much thread you need and you end up not having enough thread to get all the way to the end of your loop here. If you have enough thread and you get all the way down to the end of your loop, same thing we did before, you're just going to take your needle and tack it, find the place where you want to tack down the end, go underneath and knot it off. If you run out of thread and you can't make it to the end of your loop, it's not the end of the world. So let's pretend that I've completely run out of thread and I'm not going to make it. Okay, all you have to do, let's see here, where am I? I'm going to weave back under. I'm coming out and I'm just pulling this tight, and I'm going to come underneath and sort of the way I knot off underneath, I'm going to wrap this so that it ties off a bit. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, it's a little bit scary, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle off my thread and I'm going to cut my loop. I'm going to trim this off a little bit, and I'm going to get a needle with a bigger eye, and I'm going to thread all of these ends through there. So I'm going to start here. This is a little bit tricky. I think I'm going to have to pull this off screen to do this. I have all 18 threads going through the eye of this larger needle. And you really only want to do this if you run out of thread to fill the loop that you've used. But what you can do is then put your needle through wherever you want to tack it. is a lot of thread. Okay. I made it. Get some help here by getting all of these through. All right. Woo! I made it. Okay, so now I have tacked this down and I've been able to hide all of those threads. And then what I'm going to do is, because these are so short, is that I'm going to tie them like I do a shoelace, where I just do my little cheat knot and do them this way. Okay. So that's how I finish that if you run out. Now, over here, I did not run out. And what's up here? This is still up in the air when this one has to be tacked because you end up here. Well, here's another little trick. I finished this one off and then I very carefully, with the needle still threaded, I pushed the needle down. This will only work with a short one. I pushed the needle down inside the stitch. So you can see that the needle is inside the stitch. You can't really see it on either side. And I came through the back and knotted that off. So I hid my tail of my thread inside the woven stitch itself. So that's another option if you do a short one with the bar. But if you want your leaf to be sticking up, I would recommend doing the Picot with the pin, because that one ends near the fabric instead of up in the air. I did it over here because I didn't have room for a pin. So there are some options here for how you can get this fun three-dimensional stitch. And again, if you've got a long one, you could twist it. It's really fun for doing like coral, if you're doing an underwater scene, or hair, if you're into doing figurative stuff. A lot of fun ways to use this one. So those are our final stitches for our flower embroidery. And I'm going to go ahead and put my face back on here because it's our last floral video. I hope that you'll be continuing with us in the series and doing our geometric stitch sampler, where we'll also be learning how to do felt applique, which is where you put felt shapes on top of your fabric and sew those down and then embellish on top of them. I'll be sending out a handout with lots of examples of that fun stuff. But for tonight, thanks for sticking with me. I can't believe it. We've done 8 classes. This is amazing. And we'll have 3 to 4 more with the geometric sampler. And then I'll have nothing left to teach you. You'll know it all. So I'll see you in a couple weeks. Good night.